Today, we become legends.
Smite 2's Closed Alpha 2 patch brings 2 new gods, the role preference system, ranked and matchmaking updates, new items, and more. Here's your quick patch day breakdown of everything you need to know. So first up are the 2 new gods coming in CA2, Nuwa and Amaterasu. Amaterasu has hybrid int and strength scaling, while her 1 now grants attack speed when switching into red stance and a health shield when switching into gold stance. Her ultimate also now hits in a full 360-degree circle around her for the final attack that stuns. The first 2 hits are still a cone though. For Nuwa, she's a 100% intelligence scaling god for abilities, and we're somewhat seeing a return of her old crystal mechanics, where she activates a crystal that corresponds to the ability used, which gives some kind of passive bonus. Her passive is the wood crystal, and this still roots enemies on her next basic attack like it did in Smite 1, but this is now on a 15-second cooldown that is reduced by 1 second per basic attack, rather than needing 5 basic attacks to stack it up. Her 1 activates the water crystal, which gives her movement speed, which she always got while in the fog, but she also gains this now for 5 seconds after leaving the fog. Her 2 activates the earth crystal, which grants her flat penetration, but the soldiers themselves no longer reduce enemy protections. Her 3 activates the metal crystal, which grants her splash damage in a small area on her auto attacks for a short duration. And finally, her ultimate grants the fire crystal, which extends her basic attack range and increases her basic attack projectile speed. A basic tutorial is now available through a unique queue that teaches the very basic aspects of Smite 2. This will be expanded in future updates. Role queue preference is coming in CA2 as well for Conquest, which allows you to rank all 5 roles in order of priority from most favorite to least favorite. You should get your least favorite role much less often in this new system compared to Smite 1, and if you don't get your first or second choice role, you get priority for the next game. With the priority being higher, the lower down your list the role that you got is. Ranked is also getting some updates in CA2. Queues are now only split into solo and duo queue, which are now lumped together, and full 5-man parties. 3 and 4-man parties are no longer allowed in ranked, and solo queue is no longer exclusive. It can include duo queues. This is stated to change in the future, but at the moment there isn't a large enough player base to support the ambitious ranked system they initially implemented. There will, however, still be a solo queue only mode in the form of elite ranked Conquest, which is only accessible to diamond and above players. This threshold will move to a higher rank in the future. Any player that has access to elite ranked will gain and lose less SR in normal rank to incentivize them to queue up for elite. There has also been a pass on matchmaking and SR that should improve match quality overall in this patch. Conquest itself is getting some adjustments too this patch, with some new environment art. Towers and phoenixes are now stronger, tankier, and their bounties give less gold. Fire Giant and the Queen Naga are also now tankier and harder to kill. And finally, for Conquest in CA2, Pyromancer is making a return and functions almost identically to its Smite 1 iteration. It will spawn at 10 minutes in, replacing the rotating buff camp on the solo side of mid lane. Just like Smite 1, it drops the runic bomb when killed, but players are now limited to only 1 runic bomb in their inventory at any time, and you use the interact key to pick it up. Moving on to god balance for CA2 though, first up, Ares is getting a nerf to his passive where it now only applies half of what he gains to nearby allies rather than the full amount. Jingwei's 2 got a cooldown increase from 12 seconds to 15 seconds, as well as a nerf to how quickly she gets the extra charges when ranking up the ability. Her ultimate's damage has been decreased slightly, and her 3 now handles more like Smite 1. Ymir's passive auto damage from Frostbite has been nerfed by 10% strength and 2% int. Bacchus gets some major nerfs to his protection damage scaling on his 1 and 2. The 1 goes from 80% of protections to 50% and now also has a duration of 6 seconds, after which the buff expires, and his 2 goes from 60% of protections to 30%. The Morrigan's passive boosted basic attack now deals 80% reduced damage to titans and jungle bosses. Susano gets some small nerfs this patch as well, with 5 base damage and 10% strength scaling off of his 1, and 10 base damage and 10% strength scaling off of his 2. And finally, for god nerfs this patch, Sol loses some base damage on her 2 and had a bug fixed on her passive that was applying more strength than it should have, so effectively a nerf from 0.125 strength per heat to just 0.1 strength per heat. Sol also gets back slow immunity on her 3 as a buff though. Moving into some actual buffs though, first up is Mordred, who you may have seen nerfed in the main patch notes, but more balance was applied after the fact, which reverted all of those nerfs and buffed the base damage and protection scaling on his 1. Cernunnos 2 now roots and cripples with direct hits. Hades now fears targets directly away from him with his 2. Bellona's hammer basic attacks now apply full damage to all targets like it does in Smite 1 instead of having a cleave mechanic that reduces damage to secondary targets. Zeus's ultimate now scales down to 70 seconds as you rank it up rather than 90 seconds flat. These weave explosions now scale at 20% strength when previously it was only int scaling. Athena is no longer affected by the basic attack movement penalty when throwing her passive reach boosted basic attacks. And finally for gods, Anher gets 15 more base damage at all ranks on Impale. Moving into items though, where first up we have some new and reworked items. Sunbeam Bow is being reworked into a toggle item that drains 5% max mana per second when active to fire 2 extra ranged projectiles alongside your main basic attack that do a portion of the initial attack's damage. Eye of the Storm is also a toggle that activates a vortex that pulls enemies in towards you at the cost of 5% max health per second while active. Lifebinder is a new active item that sends out a wave of energy on use that deals damage and marks enemy gods hit. When an ally damages a marked god, they consume the mark to heal and shield themselves. And finally, for new items, we have Avenging Blade, which is a passive item that applies a slow and protection reduction when hitting enemy gods with basic attacks while in the jungle. Moving into general item balance though, first up is a game-wide nerf to crit going from 1.75x damage to 1.65x damage. Stacking items are also getting nerfed across the board in this update, with Devourer's Gauntlet losing base strength, strength per stack, and lifesteal per stack. Transcendence loses base strength and mana per stack. Book of Thoth loses base int, mana per stack, and also has a lower mana to int conversion rate. And Gauntlet of Thebes has an increased cost, decreased health, increased mana, and decreased max stacks from 45 to 30, effectively reducing the total protections as well. 4 key percent penetration items are being nerfed this patch too, with Titan's Bane, Obsidian Shard, Serrated Edge, and Spear of Desolation all receiving a 5% penetration nerf, but also a cost decrease to compensate. Hydra's Lament loses 10 strength. Heartseeker's passive max HP damage now scales at 2% strength instead of 3%. Demon Blade's passive effect now gives 15% attack speed instead of 20. Musashi's Dual Sword passive effect now gives 10% movement speed instead of 15. Amanita Charm now heals 3.5% current health per tick rather than 5%. Bluestone Pendant's passive damage has been reduced from 40 to 32. Bluestone Brooch gets similar treatment going from 160 plus 10% current health to 120 plus 7.5% current health. And finally for items, a slew of buffs are coming to underperforming or underutilized items in this update. First up, Pharaoh's Curse gets 10 more physical procs, Spectral Armor gets 25 more physical procs, Hided the Nemean Lion gets 15 more physical procs and an increase to its passive reflect damage from 10% to 12.5%. Stampede gets 10 more physical procs, Talisman of Purification gets 15 more magical procs, Phoenix Feather gets 25 more health and 15 more magical procs, Odi Hunter Scab gets 15 more magical procs, Scepter of Dominion's active effect cooldown gets cut in half from 240 seconds to 120 seconds, Jade Scepter gets 100 more health, Wish Granting Pearl gets 10 more intelligence, Golden Blade gets a 100 gold cost reduction, and finally Mystical Mail now deals less base damage but scales up per level. It takes till level 8 to break even with the damage it was doing before. Some relic balances coming in this patch as well, with beads going from 210 seconds to 180, Aegis's movement speed buff going from 4 second duration to 6 seconds, Phantom Shell gaining a larger shield and a decreased cooldown from 130 to 120 seconds, and Sunder's base damage to monsters has been decreased from 400 to 175, the per level scaling remains the same though. The god damage has also been shifted to be similar in total but to happen over a quicker time period. Potions no longer have a cooldown and can be stacked in duration but not potency, similar to Smite 1, and finally wards will now last 2 minutes instead of 1 minute and reward 50 gold if destroyed like they do in Smite 1. But that's everything you need to know for the Closed Alpha 2 update going live today. Don't forget to drop a like before you leave and subscribe to catch all my future patch coverage. I'll catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day and peace out, you nerds.